So one thing you may have heard theater people talking a lot about in the last couple weeks, ever since Disney was good enough to make Hamilton available to us in our homes, is the way that Disney, being Disney, wasn't willing to give that to us without first censoring out the F-bombs. So I'd like to talk about what does that say about the different standards of decency, about what the censors will allow on stage versus on film versus on television. So if you care about the future of freedom of artistic expression and you would like to weigh in on the discussion of that, stay tuned. So, you may have seen in 2014, I was in a community theater production of Cat in a Hot Tin Roof. I played Gooper, and that is my most watched video. It's been popular here on YouTube. However, it was not always as popular with some of the people that gave the reviews on it. In fact, I heard some people say they took real exception to Big Daddy's language. They said, would Burl Ives ever talk like that? It's interesting because Burl Ives played Big Daddy in the 1958 film version, but you know what? Burl Ives also played the role in the original stage production. And when you look at what the original script was versus what was allowed in the film, that really shows. The MPAA, which I referred to in my video a couple weeks ago about Disney Plus Hamilton, is... the Motion Picture Association of America had a very strict self-censorship standard, what was and was not allowed. And yes, Big Daddy did not say the F word because in the original stage production, because at the time, even on stage, the granddaddy of all dirty words you weren't allowed to say. However, he did say crap constantly. That was his favorite word. He says it constantly throughout the play. And that was not allowed. If you watched the 1958 film version, he wasn't allowed to say that in the film, but you better believe it, Burl Ives said that plenty of times on the stage production. But another thing that those people might not be aware of that had that complaint is the fact that, Tennessee Williams rewrote it in the 1970s, and he considered his 1970s rewrite to be the definitive version of his personal favorite play of his, and lo and behold, things had changed. By the 70s, you could say the F word, and all the F words, were put in. It's funny if you look at the original script of Cat in a Hot Tin Roof compared to the version that he rewrote in the 70s, which is the one that we used in our production. The ridiculous thing that Big Daddy would say, instead of the F word, he would say, rut the preacher. So I'd like to focus here on what that says about on television, where they still have the kind of restrictive standards that the MPAA had. And I'm sure everybody has their favorite example of the stupidest thing that has been dubbed over something. I'd like you to share with me in the comments. Please comment, what is your favorite example of a stupid thing that TV has done in order to censor a line or censor something to make it suitable for television? My personal favorite, I'll say here, of course, is from Scarface. Okay. How did you get this scar? From eating pineapple? Another example would be Edward Albee with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which, ironically, it also contained in 1962 a lot of language that trustees at Columbia University, they didn't like the language and the way and what that play said about family values, but nonetheless, it didn't have any F-bombs in it. But and on stage, you could barely get away with "screw you," which for the movie version, you may have seen they changed that to "damn you." But they changed it to the way Edward Albee did shortly before his death. He did do a new version of it that I hold here, where there's plenty of F-bombs in this one, indicating that's probably what he would have wanted to begin with, even though his language in the original version was enough to freak people out in 1962. But the bottom line is you could get away with it on stage. You couldn't in film. You certainly couldn't on television. Another example of something I was seeing recently is Olivier's version of Henry V. the tennis balls scene, it's one thing that I've always thought about.
Tell the pleasant prince, this mock of his hath turned his balls to gunstones.
And I was always like, I mean, is it just me, about his balls? Is there some double entendre there that was intended? And it made me think about this great book for actors about acting Shakespeare by Barry Edelstein. One of his things where he says, there's a reason why women were not allowed on the Elizabethan stage, where the female roles were played by prepubescent boys, because there was plenty in Shakespeare's works that was not appropriate for young audiences and so forth. And we don't often see it because the language is a barrier in many places. But a lot of times some people read a line, they say, I read something dirty into that. Is it just me? Usually it's not. What was interesting is a line out of this book, which I thought was very interesting. He said, as a rule, you can say, if something sounds dirty, it probably is, which I thought was very interesting because when I saw the Olivier version of this came out in 1944, the same line I saw was changed to,
this mock of his hath turned these balls to gunstones.
Which makes it pretty clear to me that if, in order to get the film past the censors, they felt the need to make that subtle change, obviously it wasn't just me who was hearing that double entendre in that line, not my filthy imagination. It's very clear Shakespeare intended for you to hear that, just as it was said here. If it sounds dirty, it probably was. But in case you think I'm saying all this because it's my dirty mind that insists on filth being in here, what I'd like to shift gears to now is to talk about where are some instances where, maybe the people that say let's keep things a little clean might have had a good point, where maybe things are better when they're not as graphic as they would be in these days. Like Tarantino, for example, I think he's a classic example of, he's going to put the most grotesque stuff in to shock people, over the top, deliberately find out where the line is and then deliberately cross it. And the simple reason is because I can. I mean, I'm sure I'd like to see what are some examples that you'd like to see there about where the earlier version, which wouldn't have allowed that, was actually better, not just because it doesn't gross you out or whatever, but because it was creative the way that they put stuff in. I'd like to come up with some examples of that as well and hear from you about that. Or other cases where it's not just better when you don't go over the top with the indecency, but where at least it doesn't change things significantly. It still respects the author. Like the Henry V example, okay, at least the line scans the same way, changing his into these, same number of syllables. It doesn't change the meter. Examples the other way is the Ed Sullivan Show, where you had to censor what your songs, both like kind of comparison of the Doors versus the Rolling Stones. When the Rolling Stones performed "Let's Spend the Night Together," that was too risque for 1960s audiences, so they made them change it to "Let's Spend Some Time Together." We could argue about whether that was too corny or anything that approaches the level of Scarface level of idiocy with the censors. But bottom line is, at least it scans the same way, doesn't change any rhymes or anything. When the Doors refused to change "Light My Fire" to, to get much higher, to get much better. I mean, that it would be untrue. That I would be a liar if I was to say to you, girl, we couldn't get much better. That doesn't really work, does it? So that's something. So another illustration of sometimes it might even be better with the censored version, or at least tolerable. Sometimes it just doesn't work very well, does it? And another example I'd like to go from my personal experience as a playwright that shows, sometimes you want to go farther, sometimes you want to hold back. Example is when my My first full-length play, Weeds of Sloth, was performing at a community theater in San Diego. The director was a Christian lady who objected to some of the language. She had to get my permission as the playwright to change some of them. It kind of bothered me, especially the character Sandra, when she's talking about, when she says his butt, she would say that, but I had written it as his ass. And just, it's kind of her attitude. I say, maybe it's just, you say, well, it's all filthy marks in his mind. Something about her personality. I just figured she would say ass. And if you think that it's just me, at the same time, my personal favorite of all the stuff I've written, Rations, which is available for you here on YouTube, was playing. And I had written the line as, where the old man says, well, that's really a heck of a story. And he said, and the actor playing it said, hell of a, hey, I just felt, 1944, an old man, I just as strongly as I felt that Sandra would have said ass rather than butt, I felt very strongly that the old man would have said heck instead of hell. So that's something else to think about. But anyway, getting back to what this says about films before 1968, when they weren't allowed to put certain things in, and I would argue that it was better without it, just like I would argue that it was better without the old man saying hell in Rations. I have two examples I'd like to mention. One would be the scene in Lawrence of Arabia, where he's beaten and possibly also raped by the Turkish police chief. And it is, the scene is, the scene is hard enough to watch, even with just implying what's being done. But it's also one of the areas where, great art makes us ask questions and so forth. Is it out, did he or did he not? I mean, it's implied, and it makes it interesting in that way. Another example that I would give of this would be the scene from Casablanca.
It was much more than we thought to get here. And then Captain Renault sees us, and he is so kind. He wants to help us.
Yes, I'll bet.
He tells me he can give us an exit visa, but we have no money.
Does he know that?
Oh, yes.
And he's still willing to give you a visa?
Yes, monsieur.
And you want to know?
Will he keep his word?
He always has.
Oh. Monsieur, you are a man. If someone loved you very much, so that your happiness was the only thing that she wanted in the world, and she did a bad thing to make certain of it, could you forgive her?
Nobody ever loved me that much.
And he never knew. And the girl kept this bad thing locked in her heart. That would be all right, wouldn't it?
I just think that's very interesting, as opposed to flat out saying what it is that he expects her to do if she wants the papers. It's so very clearly implied, but it's the character, just like it was the character in Rations to not say the bad word. It was also the character of the lady at the time who would say, I don't want to, I'm going to beat around the bush about what I'm saying, has been suggested to me. And it makes for an interesting scene. But to close, let's get back to Tennessee Williams and what they had to do to Streetcar Named Desire for the film version. Now, even 1947, even in the stage version, they didn't portray Stanley Kowalski graphically raping Blanche Dubois, and that's for the best. That we don't need to see that, but he does. But the line, we've had this date together from the very beginning, before that's cut from the movie. But I get that. But the one thing that the film version did with that, which is just really crazy, is they add to the end is where Stanley tries to put his arm around Stella again, and she says, don't touch me, don't ever touch me again. She takes the baby, goes upstairs to Eunice's, says she's leaving him. And I got a pretty good idea why they decided to add that, because this is what is, in my opinion, the most heinous aspect of the Hays Code that films were under from 1934 to 1968. The one that says that any evil act, even one that they couldn't even show or even have the line implying it, any evil act has to be shown being punished. Where's the logic? I mean, that's just really bothersome to me. I mean, we don't want kids to get the wrong idea. Yeah, you want kids to get the idea that that evil never wins. You know, hey, let's get back to Shakespeare. What did he have to say about that? For some rise by sin, and some by virtue fall. Important to know that. I mean, you want your kids to think that if you just shut up and don't fight for what's right, then the right thing is always going to happen. Evil people are always going to get their comeuppance. It's a nice thought, but it ain't true. Sorry. That just really, really bugs me. Not because I want Stanley not to be punished for what he did, but I don't want people, I mean, come on, am I alone here? I don't think anybody else wants people to think that, you know, justice is something that you can expect always happens, that you don't fight for it. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the matter. What are your thoughts on this? What are some of your favorite examples of things that from a movie you liked had to be changed in order to put it on television, and how things that before 1968 were in a great play that you liked that the film version couldn't put in? What are some of your favorite examples? Please let me know in the comments. Please like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you guys real soon. Bye now.